Good morning, everyone. So I'm so happy to see all the seats is filled up today, and which means yesterday content was so interesting, and today you expect to have more interesting content, and you come here with us. So I'm very happy, and we hope that we can satisfy that expectation. To open the first day today, I would like to invite Renee Von Schambert, and so here's a brief introduction about Renee. He's a pioneer of the concept of RRI, Responsible Research and Innovation. He is the author of some of the best-known publications about RRI and has played an important role in shaping the discourse on RRI over the last decade, both as an academic and as a policy officer at the European Commission. Renee Von Schambert is a philosopher and a science and technology studies specialist. He is currently guest professor at the Technical University of Darmstadt. He holds Ph.D. from University of Twente and University in Frankfurt. He has been with the European Commission since 1998. So Renee, we are so looking forward to hearing your opinion about the prospect of RRI. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nina. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. Maybe as a backstory, some 15 years ago, when I was still managing projects for DG Research, I used to try to bring projects which work on the same subject matter together. And this was something of an effort sometimes, because if I brought in then 4 or 5 coordinators together, then they would stare to each other and didn't want to really touch each other's project. There was always some competition involved, and also quite some ignorance, even also among us as project officers. Sometimes somebody next door of you would manage a project in the same field. Now, I'm very pleased to see that today at this conference, I see within our RRI community, and I think this is really a success a success story of RRI, that in a relative short time, let's say in a period of 10 years, we have built up a community where people work together, and I see coordinators now of different projects here. I see Giulia Bublini, who I think I met already in 2013 in Italy in a city, devoted to RRI, Nina, of course, Angela Simone, all kinds of powerful women coordinating projects, and projects which also cross-fertilize each other. So I'm very pleased to see that, and I think this is also a success in itself. So I want to congratulate you with these achievements, and in the meantime, of course, a lot of expertise has been built up, a lot of competences where actually I'm not competent at all, and I learn enormously a lot from you guys in this field. So today I will give a presentation which is not completely original. It has some new elements, but it's based on a chapter in our edited book on the International Handbook on Responsible Research and Innovation. I will do it in a short manner, but some highlights actually, or reminders of what RRI is about and how we can implement this. Let me see if I can handle it. So, initially I have seen RRI as a normative response to global deficits of the current research and innovation system. And I think the most important one is that we have generally, when it comes to technologies, new technologies and innovation, a system which by Western democracies at least is managed in terms of its risk. We have a lot of regulation concerning safety and quality, but we don't have a governance mechanism which allows us to address what we actually want to get out of science and technology. And this was my original thoughts, what is actually the right type of impacts we want to achieve. So later more on this. Another element is, of course, that we see that innovation is driven by global market forces, and we are more subject to change than agents of change. Of course, the central motivating force behind RRI is that we as citizens have to become agents of change and can become agents of change in terms of driving innovation towards social desirable outcomes. Now, I have seen that in this current project, the link with smart specialization is made. I think this is in itself a smart thing to do, and I think we have to enter into this discussion as well. Now, thirdly, I think that RRI is a response to the fact that we have seen science and technology too long as an objective in itself. This has, in European Union history, going back to the 1950s, in the early treaties, which were science and technology rather consensual up to date, but always as a goal in itself, and of course implicitly, not explicitly very often, linked to the idea that it will bring us economic prosperity independent of the fact what type of innovations we will have. Now, RRI tries to bring in research and technology and science in the field of discussion on values, as we do have with other European policies. And actually, science and technology policy is the only policy we have at the European level which is not linked to our values, which are, for example, to be found in our treaties. So this is one thing. I always have tried to make science and technology less consensual than it appears to be. We have to make it conflictual. We have to make it debatable. And as of course in the course of your projects, where you are occupied with making regional and local translations of global problems, then you will see that different values which we share can come in conflict with each other and has to be articulated and debated in order to get a proper and acceptable innovation. Now, what is also important, I think, is that we have to move away, and we actually now also at the European level do that as significant extent for the first time, actually, to move away from technological potentials as such, or trying to maximize them, towards driving innovations towards societal desirable goals. The SDGs are, of course, very dominant in this thing. I think now in Horizon Europe, 50% of the budget is devoted to sustainable development goals. What is also important, and which has occupied myself for the last couple of years, is to promote open scholarship, and that is much more than just open access to journals, which is only a very minor side effect of the whole thing. But it goes to the heart of science, to make science more open in terms of openness towards actors, and to knowledge sources, which is already a sort of precondition for RRI, a necessary one, a not sufficient one. And finally, I think we need what I call anticipatory governance mechanisms, which allow us to foresee and to discuss plausible scenarios for implementation of new innovations, and which is an essential element for giving innovation a direction and possibly also defining its characteristics. So these are the 6 things, the 6 major headlines, I would say, which we require at the global level. And this is in itself a challenge, but the translation to regional elements is equally a challenge in itself. Now, let me, I roughly have my talk in 2 parts or 3 parts. One is on open scholarships, the second one is on value-driven innovation, and the last one is then on anticipatory governance. Now, the case for open science is maybe now easy to make. I had actually, as with RRI, a frustrating life in the European Commission. It was a struggle, uphill struggle. But thanks goodness now in 2021, the doors are open thanks actually to COVID, because this made the argument for open science and equally RRI much more easier to make. And this has to do with the current system in which research and innovation is incentivized. Normally, or historically, we have mainly addressed it by looking to financial frameworks, and wherein researchers actually are forced to produce as much as possible, and production means they produce as much publications as possible. And this is backed up very often by a quantitative metric system of research management, which tries to measure, between brackets, the quality and productivity of researchers. Now, in my view, because of pushing the researchers to publish as much as possible, we actually achieved a system which is becoming very unproductive. Researchers have become competitors of each other, copy and paste the publications as much as possible to diversify and to maximize it, but it doesn't help much in terms of addressing societal challenges. And there are very strong indications that, and this is really against the ideology of my employer, that research in science and technology has become more productive over the years. I think actually the contrary in terms of addressing societal challenges. Now, what we have to do about it is actually rather simple and very logical to do, and if you are scientists, they also are willing to do it if the incentives and reward system would be right. And we have seen it actually with COVID. I mean, you cannot get a vaccine in 1 year if you don't open up the system, if you don't let people share data instantly, globally over the world, if you don't reward them for doing so, otherwise they wouldn't, and if you don't take away the IPR incentives for preventing them to publish somewhere in a high impact journal. Now, there is a long story, of course, but shortly I favor a system in which we have to reward researchers in terms of their relative contribution to a research mission. And these research missions can be, of course, very different. But what is important here is that we don't have to make researchers productive in terms of number of publications, but have to make them productive in terms of their research behavior. To what extent do you collaborate? To what extent do you share data and knowledge in regard to a particular mission? And this we have achieved with COVID, and this is why we have a vaccine within a period of a year. Of course, we also subsidized multinationals with billions of dollars. They would not have done it on their own initiative, which is part of the market deficit I already pointed out to. There is no economic rationale very often to address the most important issues on the world, be it malaria or in this case COVID. Now, open science means opening up science in all aspects of the research circle, already starting from the scientific discovery phase in terms of using open notebooks, for example, defining open research agendas with actors beyond the academic sphere. So the whole research cycle has to be opened up. I will not explain all elements of this circle. I think you will be familiar with it. But important to retain is that it's not just opening up to knowledge sources like data and publications, but also openness towards other actors, both within science and outside of science. So it's actually a simple thing, sharing knowledge data as early as possible with all relevant knowledge actors involved. So then we have a sort of precondition for RRI, I believe. We already have then some elements in it. The question now actually is, we did it now with COVID to some extent, actually not even in the idle sense, But the question now is actually, why don't we apply it to all SDGs? Why don't we do this? There is no rational argument for not doing this. So now the second, so this open science is as a condition of RRI. I think now the second element, this is a more difficult issue because this touches on global market forces where multinationals, especially in the pharmaceutical and agro biosphere, is dominating the global markets and preventing sometimes sensible innovations to come across. Generally, I think we are more subject to change than agents of change when it comes to innovations. And the whole, the motivational force behind RRI is, of course, that we as citizens become agents of change rather than that we only are subjected to it. So how can we do it? That means that, first of all, science and innovation is not an objective in itself. It's also not that all innovations are by definition good, but that we have to give some directionality to innovation. We want to drive innovation towards particular ends, and we want to shape its possible characteristics. Now, I understand that in this particular project, SeeRRI, you have employed the famous Quadruple Helix approach. And I think this is, of course, as previous with open science, that would have been already the Quadruple approach, but there is an additional element to it. It's not just about stakeholder participation, but it's about stakeholder commitments on driving this innovation to an agreed social objective. And in order to get that, I'm not sure to what extent you have managed to do this in this project. I would really like to learn from that. But I think that's the challenge, and that's the challenge we have, for example, have at the European level with the Green Deal. That's, I think, is the first example where our legislation also comes into force and enabling actors to become actually responsible for their own business. This is so RRI has to do with a new governance of our economy. It has to be implemented by a much more proactive force of public authorities. I believe that public authorities, such as the Commission, has been too long, too far away off the innovation process for many years. A too much laissez-faire approach in the last decades. Finally, I think we should not employ IPR in the RTD phase. If we do that, we block innovation rather than we stimulate it, at least when it comes to innovations which drives us to social desirable ends. That's a long story. I cannot explain it here in detail, but maybe we can do it in a discussion, but just to retain the argument. So the third part, maybe this is a central part for our discussion here, is to show RRI as a value, as a form of value-driven innovation. As we know, and as I highlighted before, we have seen science and technology too much as an objective in itself, actually disconnected from the values on which we want to see our innovations actually based. And initially, I have made a case that in our European treaty, we will find a lot of important social commitments and values, such as sustainable development, of promotion of social justice, for example, high levels of protection, quality of life, etc. But they have been disconnected from the promotion of scientific and technological advance. The treaty actually says the EU shall promote science and technology, shall promote scientific and technological advance, nothing more. So we have to interconnect them, and this will make science and technology more controversial, more debatable. At the same time, we see in the sciences that science has become more and more taken by, I would say, an engineering perspective. We see it even in biology, where where in synthetic biology, for example, an engineering perspective becomes more and more important. We see it in physics, in nanotechnology. We hear very often safety by design as words, which actually echoes a field in the sciences where scientists become more and more designers, and that means also they become more and more responsible for what they create. Maybe the old model that science as a value-free system, or a system in which you can say we externalize the responsibilities to society and politics, can be difficultly upheld if you take up an engineering perspective. And this is maybe the most famous example. These are bridges built in the 1930s on Long Island near New York. They are very low bridges. So Robert Moses was there, the dominant architect. He was very influential in New York. And they were deliberately built so low because it doesn't allow public buses to arrive to the coastal areas. And the idea was that the American blacks who normally use public services cannot reach the beaches. So this is a famous example in which the design, and this is just a bridge of course, where a particular value, in this case a discriminatory value, has been incorporated systematically along Long Island, and it's actually still hitting people today. Now, you can also have a different one, thanks, and this is why Nien came a little bit late on the theater, so I was to blame, because I wanted to show you another picture, and that is this one. Because I saw that you have been busy with coastal management. This is an example from the Netherlands. The Netherlands have been, after the war in the early 50s, hit by a serious flooding, killing, I think, more than 2,000 people, because the polders run over with an exceptionally high tide. And since those years, there has been a debate on how to protect people from the sea in that particular area. But if you would just build a simple dike, this would have serious consequences for different actors in the field here. It would have the consequence, for instance, that the water inland would become sweet, which will have an impact of the fisheries, of course. It would have impact on tourism. It would have an impact on the agriculture, because also the land, because of the sweet water, would change in its nature. It would have serious impacts. Finally, after a long debate by including all the actors involved, so this is a really early example of a quadruple helix approach stemming from the 1950s already in the Netherlands. They have built a dike which, as you can see here, it's around 9 kilometers long, but it has very large shows which you can close and open. It's a very expensive system, and you had to build special ships. They had to build special ships in order to build it. They started building it eventually at the end of the 60s and could not conclude it earlier than in 1986. But the shows, they close automatically when the tides get high, if necessary. So this is a sort of, you can see the consensus and the commitment of 4 or 5 different type of actors: farmers, tourist people, tourist interests, safety interest, public authorities interests, all reflected in this bridge. So this is all about value-driven innovation. I wanted to give you another example, but I think, which is based on foresight, but maybe for time reasons I will shift that one for the sake of having a good opportunity for discussion. So let me finish it off with the future of RRI in terms of anticipatory public governance. I think the first one is that we have to, what I call, organizing and institutionalizing collective co-responsibility. And this can be in different areas, it can mean different things. In the case of digitalization, it has to do with making people sensible and responsible for data management, include people in the work in that, and that means also sometimes to work across sectors. Open research and scholarship, I already touched on that, so I won't say much more on this. Value-driven innovation has to become a constitutional matter. It's actually, I would be a proponent of a treaty change here, even though we are now managed with Horizon Europe to go a long way along these lines. Furthermore, public governance of the economy, we're given directionality to innovation. I don't know how this is handled here in the project with smart specialization, or even I would like to really learn from you. Finally, so we have to, I'm a big fan of foresight and technology assessment. We have to understand that these mechanisms are only effective if they include a discussion about alternative futures. I think we have to engage in such discussions much more in terms of a deliberative democracy. Finally, and I think this is the new point, and I think this is a challenge in Horizon Europe. Probably you are aware of it. The new feature is that there are some missions in Horizon Europe defined, and I think what's the new thing about the missions, although it's not always communicated well, because sometimes our public communication officers, they refer to like putting a man on the moon, which arguably was also a mission. But I think these missions are completely different in nature. It's not about achieving a technical goal, but a social objective. And if you want to achieve a social objective, the implementation of these missions are actually much more difficult than technical missions. An old book of 1973, I think, from Robert Nelson about the moon and the ghetto actually addresses that in the US. We brought people to the moon, but we cannot solve the problems of the American ghettos. And we now, in 2021, we have started with missions with a social objective, and which is also, and I think this is the new mantra in Horizon Europe. Many have complained RRI doesn't seem to, as a term, doesn't seem to appear so much in headlines anymore, although it has become a strategic objective of our program. But co-design and co-creation are the key words now, the mantras, and of course this is an essential RRI element, and virtually actually the biggest part of the whole RRI, not just a specific program like we had with SWOFs. It's regrettable we don't have that anymore, but on the other hand, we have expanded this to the whole program. So inclusive research and innovation agendas will be a future across the program, and I think the success of it will very much depend on people like you who apply to it, because you can have fantastic theories about what you need to fund, but what happens is what people do to it, and sometimes you have very bad calls for research proposals, but you get good projects, and sometimes you have very nice ideas about RRI, but then you get bad projects. So anything is still possible here, but the challenge lies there. Now, I think to conclude with this, I think basically when it comes to the theory of RRI, I think the normative approach is that we should try to steer research and innovation to public goods, because public goods have been subject to erosion the last decades because we have led it over to global market forces. And this is where our public authorities, including the Commission, has to step up. In terms of implementation in research and innovation, as I mentioned, the open and collaborative research mode will become more and more important, especially in the context of mission-oriented research. And in terms of innovation, innovation will become more value-driven, value-sensitive, in terms of value-sensitive design by TA and foresight approaches, new public-private partnerships, and what is very important, I think, and I want to learn, and maybe the next speaker will also enter this, is how we articulate, let's say, conflicting values when it comes to implementation of innovation at a local level. As you all know, if we the global change of the climate change models are normally things which are analyses on global changes at a very general level, but what it means, for instance, what global change means for Barcelona or for Bangladesh or for the Netherlands is quite different, and what it means to implement measures according to that is also quite different. I was recently also fascinated by a citizen science university initiative in the Netherlands where they have tried to translate the current commitments on climate change to a local city, and then the story looks completely different than when it comes to global models. So I think I should conclude with that. I already took a lot of time from you, so I will just finalize that we eventually want to have responsible innovation as a new paradigm of research and innovation. That means that ethics is not just to be handled as a constraint of the market, which we do now, in terms of risk management of technology, but becomes actually a driving force. And the quadruple Helix model can be a driving force only, I think we have to admit that, only if we can connect it to social commitments, and sometimes even have to back it up with legislative measures. This slides can be distributed to you all, and the paper which behind it as well. So just to advertise the book, I can't hesitate to do that. But here, this is my website, and there you can download all kinds of stuff for free, of course, I think, including this presentation. So I thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate that I can be here, and I enjoy already your presence, and I hope to answer some of your questions satisfactorily. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much for the insightful information and speak and knowledge that you have delivered in a short time. I know 30 minutes is not too much, but I believe we have learned a lot, and thanks for the example that you put it there. And we have many questions from the audience in Slido, and within a short time, I don't think we can address all of them. Sorry if you cannot hear me before. So there's several questions in the Slido, and I would like to choose some of them so that you can address here first, and the other question I will send you through email, and then we can post on the SeeRRI website later. So the first question, there's 6, 7 question here, so I will just choose some of them that I think we can address at the moment. How do you reconcile co-creation concept with political democracy? That's the first question. And collectively co-responsibility sounds to me like a ticket to free riding. If individuals don't have individual responsibility, how can we hold them accountable for their action? That's the second one. And the third one related to the rules-based approach that the government need to, the rules-based approach for the companies, but how can we formulate rules for research and innovation and enforce those rules? So I think that 3 questions are interesting, and I hope you can answer here, and all the questions we will send to you later.
Okay. So I think the first question was on the political dimension, and about in what sense is reconcilable with the democracy issue. Well, the topic, of course, that RRI is I see personally responsible research and innovation as a social-political innovation in itself. So this is also why I did not do it today as much, but this is why I normally emphasize very much that RRI is not something which like you did on a project level, but it's something which has to happen at the social political level. We have to change our systems of science and of the economy. So it is a political thing, and you see gradually the last 10 years that we have been starting to work on that. Currently we try to change the rewards and incentive system for research. That means other funding systems for research, other funding systems for innovation. We start to work a little bit on the public economy part. We see that with the Green Deal, so there are small progresses here, but together it means that we change our innovation system, which is from a market-based innovation system, purely market-based innovation system, towards a system where public authorities become a more active element. Obviously, RRI is consistent with, I'm a student of Habermas, so very much in favor of deliberative democracy. I've tried to work on that since my studies in the 1970s. So it's all about deliberative democracy, and I'm happy to see actually that the first time also at the European level there will be massive citizens' involvement in all kinds of programs. I hope only that it's not something like just an add-on where we do it in terms of using polls and all these terrible type of things. I mean, sometimes you might need to use a poll, but we should do a little bit more than that because we want to make, as I say, citizens agents of change. The second question, that goes right into the heart. It's about co-responsibility. Actually, the assumption behind the question was precisely why I think it's so important to organize it. I arguably did not elaborate on this very well in this presentation. Maybe it's best indeed to illustrate it on an example which I had in my presentation, but for time reason I did not show. You see now in the agricultural field with the emergence of what they call precision technologies, a development in which agriculture can in the future soon be a system with very huge farms which are actually unmanned, where tractors are autonomous, driving over the fields with sensors, and where big companies like Monsanto from the head offices will collect the data and drive these farms. You can also have something in which, let's say, farmers, individual farmers, work together and share their data on how their fields are being treated, or they're exposed to weather and particular conditions, and become more an agent of change by using this data. But the presupposition is, of course, who owns the data, who has access to it, and what can you do with it? And what will it mean in terms of defining the characteristics of these technologies? Now, this is precisely where co-responsibility comes in, because public authorities has to become active there, and I have to say, well, farmers, you are, if you deliver them to the global market, they are actually part of the change, but cannot influence these developments because they are not empowered to do so. But if governments intervene and say, well, we assign farmers here a task, and in Europe actually there is an agreement, there is a code of conduct with agricultural industries to say, well, the data is actually should be owned by the farmers. So that means that if you do that, if you make them responsible for their own management, then they also can become active in the field of innovation. So co-responsibility means not just that by definition we are co-responsible for innovation, but it's also enabling people who otherwise are your subject to change become an agent of change. And we have to organize this. We have to organize this in terms of constitutional arrangement, like the implementation of the precautionary principle for 20 years was an important element, I think, on the way on that front. in the constitutional way, which because also was a road to deliberative democracy, because you can only apply the precautionary principle if you debate it, what it means in practice and in context, in regional context. And furthermore is that we have to think about organizing it also in terms of management of research and innovation things. So collective co-responsibility is more than just a slogan. It needs to be articulated, and of course it means for each innovation a different way of doing it. The last question, I think, was about...
Rules-based approach, but yeah, the rules-based approach, how can we make the rules-based approach of government research and innovation? Rules-based approach. How can government give rules to research and innovation, or common in private sector?
Well, yeah, I think I partly entered in this discussion. So on the first is, the most important one is, of course, that we have to change our way we fund, how we reward them. So actually, what is actually interesting to, maybe not many people know this at this point of time, but we at the first time in the history of the European Union have changed the excellence criterion. Normally your projects are evaluated, I think, on excellence, on impact, and on management. And excellent means normally you have to have a brilliant idea, and it has to go beyond the state of the art. But now the excellence criterion also includes to what extent you are able to work with other actors. So this will be a rewardable element in the excellence criterion. This is in itself very controversial. There are many scientists who are against this, but it's of course an RRI element. So this is one thing. There are of course other things. I think this is one of the main things we have to do, changing this system. Universities are very slow in changing actually to another rewards and incentive system. I'm always amazed how slow this, or frustrated by the slowness of this change. And then when it comes to innovation, we have the whole area of public governance, of course, where we have to go beyond commitments of just risk issues, but also include ethical and sustainability criteria for applying new technologies. We don't do that yet, so this is still something which, we don't do that in terms of regulation yet, not enough. Some countries have SDGs as a legal objective, but don't translate it well. And this is why we actually currently face a situation in which citizens go to court and say, well, you agreed on doing something about climate change, but we don't see it happen. And in the Netherlands, for example, they have even forced a multinational like Shell to do something about it. So this is a very interesting dynamic. But that also means that there is pressure now on public authorities to step up.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so there's more to say, but I can't say it shorter.
So Renee is here with us at a conference. I hope that if we have more questions, we can come to him and we can chat over the chat and the break. Okay. So thank you so much, Renee.
Thank you.